Hello, everybody. It is Sam, the Reclaimer developer, and it is officially March, and that means we've started a new sprint. Yesterday on stream, we wrapped up the third person camera and player controls sprint, and I will go ahead and launch the Reclaimer, and we'll go over the updates that have been going on. And while I wait for VS Code to do its thing, uh, February was kind of a crazy month in terms of what needed to be done in order to get things working. So I will go ahead and run the game, and just at first glance, there's not a ton of things that appear to be different, but I can promise you the rendering library needed a complete overhaul in order to get things working the way I wanted them to. Um, First, I will go ahead and show the player controls. Uh, as you can tell, it's obvious that we have mouse and keyboard support, but I wanted a support for gamepads, and you can see that there's the gamepad status here. I'll go ahead and get that running, and you can see that immediately it shows as connected. And as I move the controls about, you can see that we have input from all the buttons. So D-pad, start, select. We got, let's see, the sticks, bumpers, and the button pads. And in addition to like the analog controls, we've got the triggers and we've got the sticks. So I wanted to do more. I wanted to get Adam moving, but with the amount of things that I had going on, it seemed a bit more appropriate to do that for March's sprint. And moving on to that, you can see that we also have this little widget down here, this little pyramid looking thing that shows a representation of a third person camera. And it's just a simple debug geometry that's like it starts building a pyramid at the camera's position, and it builds the pyramid base towards the target. And it's just a simple representation that you can reason about of like, hey, this is where the third person camera is. And I will go ahead and show that, what that looks like. So we've got these cameras, and right now there's two. Hello, Seraph. There's the debug camera, which is the one I'm just moving all about the place. And then there's the player camera right here, the little green box. So I will go ahead and switch to the player camera, and you can see that it immediately goes to the perspective of the player camera that's over Adam's shoulder here. I wanted it to be very reminiscent of Dead Space, if I can go ahead and look up an example of that. So there's I think the perfect example of this is if you look at Dead Space's intro cinematic, and I'll go ahead and pull that up. Dead Space intro scene, where the crew is on the USG Kellyan as part of the introduction. So yeah, this is a really good example. That is a very blurry image. Let's see if there's a better one I can pull up. These are really bad images. Here we go. This is a really good example. So you have this picture, right? This is the intro scene to Dead Space. So the main character is here, Isaac, and he's sort of like off to the side, and the target center of the scene is directly in front. So like if you were to draw like a crosshair that is like dead center on the scene, it would be like right in this center, like right below this hatch right there, in between that hatch and the computer console, and between Kendra on the left and Hammond on the right. And the main character is kind of off to the side, whereas the camera target is dead center. And so that's the look that I'm looking to recreate in the Reclaimer. But I also want to add this feature that's in The Last of Us where you can switch positions. So if you would prefer to play with like a right-handed versus a left-handed perspective, you could do that. It would mostly be just for like quick targeting and stuff like that. So I can move back to the debug camera, which is back here, and it's a bug that I don't turn off the camera controls. So if I were to switch back to the player camera and move stuff around, like randomly click on things, and I switch back to the debug camera, like it's not where I left it. So that's something that I do need to fix. And another issue is when I go to the player camera and I look at the controls, like let's say if I were to like move the target, there's like this weird parabolic effect that happens. It's not doing it right now. I'm really surprised actually. Uh, well, it was doing it on stream last night, where it kind of, if I move things around, the rotation kind of moves in sort of a parabolic arc. And I think that just has something to do with like the view matrices being not entirely correct. Uh, but that is on the surface most of the updates. You can see that there's no grid here anymore, and that's because I'm going to roll that into the player sandbox. And so I'll go ahead and talk about the player sandbox before I go into the code too much further. So the sandbox is exactly what it sounds like. It's just going to be an area that contains most of the places where you can spawn different models and game systems and stuff like that, light sources. It's just going to be a place that really stretches the abilities of the game's engine. So there's not going to be too much to it, and there is a physics library that I created that just houses really basic components right now. The I think it's the position, velocity and rotation components. So it's something that's really, really basic. It's not even a real physics engine at this point, but that's the details of that are going to be hashed out this month, where more robust physics systems are going to come into play. So, and the basic sandbox, I don't really know what that's going to look like yet, but I'm thinking it'll probably just be sort of like this arena type area that just has different objects that you can interact with. So having said that, I mentioned that the rendering system required a complete overhaul. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the main thing that was added to the rendering system, and that is all of these components. So in the component system, I had a ton of components that were just all over the place from different systems. And I took those out of the core component, the core entity system, and put them into their corresponding libraries. And most of the components were rendering based at this point. So we have these tables of different components. We have ways that we can access them. And I think at this point, I will save like going into details for a future video on the entity system, because that deserves a full video of its own, and I think it is finally ready to talk about. And the OpenGL system that I've been sort of like the OpenGL functions that I've been using to like wrap the OpenGL library, I came to the realization that I had a very like naive understanding of how OpenGL works, and I created the concept of different buffer components, and there are buffers that can be stored on the GPU. Like when you load a buffer onto the GPU using OpenGL, it is there until you delete it. And at any given time, you can create a vertex array object that can be bound to those, or you can create a vertex array object that you can bind buffers to at any time. So how I was doing it was like, I want to create a vertex object, and here's all the buffer data I want to do that with. And it would just create buffers and bind them to a vertex array object all in one go. Well, that's not necessarily how OpenGL, I think, is meant to work. So instead, we now have these tables of rendering buffers that are like, here's some data that's on the GPU, here's how big it is, and here's a handle to access it. And I store that handle, and like, here's Adam's model buffers, here's the skybox buffers, and I create a model that's like, I want to use these buffers, and it binds it to the VAO. It's a much more flexible system, and also I'm not doing it now, but it does add a foundation through which I can track memory on the GPU. So I think just this particular vlog is just a whole bunch of jargon. I wish I had more that I could illustrate, but at the core of it, that is pretty much it. It's just the rendering system was revamped to accommodate for a new way of thinking about how buffers and vertex array objects are handled, and to accommodate for like a composition-based architecture for putting models together. And that's pretty much it. And I wanted to do player movement, but that'll be more appropriate for the sandbox. I'm going to work on an infinite grid that is on the X and Z axes. So when I actually move, you can see like how the world shifts around. And there's also going to be the concept of a player rig. And so the player rig is literally just going to be everything that's attached to the player character. So the player character itself, the third-person camera, his weapons, inventory, just like everything that moves around as the player is moving stuff on screen, that is going to be the player rig. And it will have references to... It's going to be a very simple struct that contains entity IDs of like things that are bound to it. And it's just a way of saying when the player moves, all of these things need to move with it. And there will be a time for talking about how third-person cameras need to move as the player moves about the scene, but that can come at a much later date. And that's pretty much it. So it has been a bit of a chaotic month in terms of development. There was a whole lot of stuff I wasn't anticipating on doing, but a huge amount of progress has been made. And I just want to thank everybody who's been subscribed to the channel and who's been filtering in and out of the streams when I do them. I appreciate every single one of you who's been tuning in to the progress. And the website is coming, I swear. But like I said, it's just been a very chaotic month in terms of development. Every free moment I've had has basically been thrown at revamping the rendering system. So that's basically it. And thank you all so much for tuning in, and expect a video on the entity system sometime later this week. And I'll see you in the next video.